Some outbreaks of rain here, likely falling as snow across hills, and a good breeze moving along those northeastern coasts too. But for much of the day, many of us will see plenty of dry weather. Still those showers though feeding in around coasts of Northern Ireland and northeast Scotland. And then it's later on into the afternoon we'll see outbreaks of rain start to clip southern coast. It's going to be a very wet and windy day on offer across the Channel Islands. So the worst of the weather here, but elsewhere seeing a slightly drier day on offer, and with temperatures round about average for the time of year, though slightly milder across the south. As we head into Thursday, a ridge of high pressure means much more sunshine around, plenty of dry weather once this area of rain moves away from the far southeast. Still can't rule out a few showers, particularly once again around coasts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but for many, plenty of dry weather and lots of sunshine around too. Still some dry weather for Friday, though can't rule out some rain, particularly as we head towards the weekend, and temperatures remaining around average.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Big problems in Lancashire for the M6. The motorway is blocked northbound just before the Leyland turn off junction 28. There's an accident in the two outside lanes, a lorry involved that's being recovered. And in Cheshire on the M62 westbound, the two inside lanes closed from junction 10 to 9 just off the M6 as you head towards Warrington where a lorry's broken down. In Bedfordshire on the M1, one lane's blocked off northbound from junction 11 to 11A near Dunstable. A car's broken down just off the Dunstable Northern bypass. In Hampshire, the M275 is down to a single lane southbound at junction 2 at the Rudmore roundabout heading towards Portsmouth, obviously, where a lorry's broken down. And heading out of London, the A12 is currently blocked off Gubbins Lane at Haroldwood. There's a crash with queues through Romford and on the A127 as you divert. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize so far, £50,000 in tax-free cash. How would you react if you won?
We won 25,000. I'd say don't hesitate, do it. If you're not in it, you've got no chance of winning it.
Don't miss out as lines close on Friday. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
It's Patrick Christys tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christys tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. It's Tuesday, the 28th of January. I am Christopher Hope, covering for Nigel Farage on the show tonight. The Prime Minister will not impose a cap on net migration, despite new ONS figures which suggest the population will increase by 5 million in a decade, owing to a surge in net migration. The man of the hour, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, will be joining me to discuss this very soon. And according to a leaked Home Office document, Britain's new approach to extremism could be based on concerning behaviours rather than ideologies. I'll be speaking to the former Conservative Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, about that. Plus, why is Nigel Farage not on the Privy Council? With members of the SNP and DUP allowed to access and be given highly sensitive briefings on issues of national importance, shouldn't one of the most influential figures in our modern politics be trusted with state secrets? All of this to come, but first the news with Sam Francis.
Chris, thank you, and very good evening to you. It's just after 7 o'clock. The top story, well, the UK's population is set to soar by nearly 5 million over the next decade, driven almost entirely by net migration. That's according to new figures from the Office for National Statistics. By mid-2032, the UK population is expected to hit 72.5 million people, sparking concerns over pressure on resources and services. Campaigners are also sounding the alarm over social care, with the number of over 85s set to double to 3.3 million by 2047, with the sector already struggling to meet current demand. The Tories are calling for a legal cap on visas, but Downing Street's rejected the idea, insisting their own policies will tackle the issue more effectively. A leaked Home Office report has revealed a proposal to classify conspiracy theories, misogyny and the manosphere as extremism. The government, though, is pushing back, insisting there are no plans to expand the definition. Home Office Minister Dan Jarvis says the leaked documents don't reflect the current policy and were never meant to be implemented. The review commissioned by the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper also suggests new laws to crack down on harmful online content. But critics warn this could overwhelm authorities and risk missing truly dangerous extremists. Well, the Shadow Business Secretary, Andrew Griffith, told us earlier that the report's conclusion is disturbing.
The Home Secretary needs to publish this immediately so that we can all see for ourselves what and who it is that's saying these non-crime hate incidents, these attack and waste of police resources, something a Conservative Home Secretary stopped. And there's clearly a cell within the Home Office that is not concerned about ordinary crime, ordinary policing, in favour of this ideological approach to non-crime hate incidents. They're wrong. That's not where we should be putting our police resources. And the Home Secretary needs to come to Parliament today, publish this report and explain who it is that keeps coming up with this idea.
The Scottish Government has launched a review of child protection following the conviction of 7 members of a Glasgow child abuse ring. The case, which saw 3 children subjected to horrific abuse in a drug den, has raised serious questions about how authorities fail to act, despite clear signs of neglect and school absences. Children's Minister Natalie Donines says the situation is a horrifying failure and stressed the need for urgent action. MSPs have also questioned whether child safeguarding in Scotland is still fit for purpose. The government, though, has vowed to ensure lessons are learned and that such abuse never happens again. Cardiff University has announced plans to cut 400 full-time jobs as it battles a £30 million budget shortfall. Those cuts could also lead to school closures and merging of subjects, with nursing, music and modern languages among the areas at risk. The University and College Union has slammed the proposals, calling them cruel and unnecessary, pledging to fight any compulsory redundancies. But the university's Vice-Chancellor said it must make difficult decisions to adapt to rising costs and falling international student numbers. An update on the situation in the Middle East, and the UK has pledged an extra £17 million in humanitarian aid to Gaza, with a focus on food, on water, healthcare and sanitation. The Development Minister made the announcement in the House of Commons earlier, as the fragile ceasefire in Gaza now enters its 2nd week. Thousands of civilians are now returning to the north of the territory, and Annalise Dodds has warned that Israel's ban on UN aid risks stalling the progress made, calling for unrestricted access for humanitarian agencies. And the Prince of Wales has rolled up his sleeves today for a very hands-on visit to an eco-friendly farm. Prince William spent an hour getting stuck into sustainable farming and even dug through a bin full of worms and compost and checked out a new grain store. He also explored solar panels and a community event space at the 630-acre farm, leading the way in cutting carbon emissions. The visit highlights the Duchy of Cornwall's ongoing commitment to greener farming practices. That's the news on GB News. I'll be back with you in an hour. Now, though, it's back over to Westminster and Chris Hope.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Christopher Hope. Now, the UK's population is set to rise to 72.5 million by mid-2032. That projection released today by the Office for National Statistics is driven almost entirely by net migration, with a 5 million increase within 10 years. Earlier on, I caught up with the usual presenter of this show, Nigel Farage, the UK Reform leader in Parliament, as he was going about his civic duties there. Here's what he had to say. With me now is Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK. Nigel Farage, 5 million more people arriving here, settling in here on a net basis between 2022 and 2032.
Well, remember that the population's increased by more than 10 million in the last 20 years. More than 10 million. And so this projection from the Office of National Statistics says another 5 million. And we're all supposed to just accept it, say nothing, don't complain, or we're nasty people. And what's worth remembering, there is a consensus in this building between both the Labour and the Conservative parties. Whatever they say at general elections, whatever promises they make, they're both more than prepared to accept this. And my argument now, for many, many years, has been this is diminishing the quality of life for virtually everybody in this country. Why do I say that? Well, just suppose the government does build 1.5 million homes. That won't even be enough to cope with the numbers coming into the next 5 years, let alone the shortfall that we have now. Have a think about GP services. New homes still being built everywhere, no new GP practices, waiting times for a doctor, beyond anything our parents and grandparents could ever even have dreamt of. Traffic, I mean, don't even get me started. Our quality of life is diminishing because of this. But here's the key point. The majority of those that are coming don't work. You know the argument for the last 20 years?
What's your evidence for that?
I'll give it you. Don't worry, Nigel, it's good for the economy because everybody comes in works. Of the last 3 million that entered the country from outside the European Union under the last Conservative governments, of the last 3 million, only 22% are working. So here's the real kicker. Not only is living our lives more difficult, it's directly making us poorer. There is no argument for continued mass migration, and yet I fear it's going to continue.
Number 10 say today, repeatedly, these figures are staggeringly high. Chris Philp for the Tory party, they say these figures can and must be stopped. You're sniggering because the Tories have failed over 14 years.
I'm sorry. It isn't just failure. We all fail in life. But you can't promise in 2010 in a manifesto, in 2015 and 2017 to reduce to tens of thousands a year. Then again in 2019 to say a big reduction. And then in 2023 net, 1 million people come. So no one's going to take Chris Philp seriously at all. And what was really interesting in the general election, whenever Keir Starmer laid out his key 5 or 6 objectives, legal immigration was never one of them.
He won't set a cap. He says caps don't work, but they are expecting a white paper on net migration in coming weeks. They might get it right. These are projections based on current party policy. If they can tighten it even further, the figures might come down from where they are now.
There is no indication the Labour Party will change the barriers, the limits to legal migration, let alone what's coming across the English Channel. There's no indication they intend to do any of this at all. I suspect numbers will continue at massive historic levels. And remember this, from Windrush until almost the millennium, net migration was at 30,000 a year. Now it's running at up to 1 million a year. That just gives you some sense of perspective of just how mad this has all become.
Well, what would you do at Reform UK? You fought the election on a net zero target. Net zero is 5 million arriving over the next 10 years, isn't it?
Net zero would mean, and by the way, not the loony net zero, which means we don't produce our own oil and gas. Net zero means no population increase as a direct result of migration.
That's a net figure, though, so you might have over the next 10 years, 5 million arriving, 5 million leaving.
That's possible. People will come, people will go, but we would significantly tighten up the rules around those that come. We would want people that come to be working. And frankly, the idea that one person comes, gets a job, and the whole of the family come from India is just not acceptable.
But they're stopping that, aren't they? They're stopping families coming.
I've been hearing they're stopping that for over 10 years, and it hasn't stopped. and the numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger. We cannot afford it. It's damaging our way of life. We've got to get a grip.
It's difficult, though, isn't it? Because the answer is getting more off benefits, more UK workers into the workforce, and it's cheaper to bring them from overseas. And that's the reality. And you haven't been in government. You haven't faced that challenge, have you? You're offering, if I may, easy solutions from the sidelines.
It's cheaper for the employer. It's not cheaper for the taxpayer when they bring so many dependents with them and put so much pressure on the health service and every other form of public service. And look, here is the point. We do not need low-skilled migration into Britain. Do we need some brilliant engineers to come in and help us with AI? Perhaps we do, although actually we have many of our own good ones who are currently leaving. The big kicker to all of this is you have to break the gap of welfare dependency. If you're on benefits, a big range of benefits, and you go to work and work for more than 16 hours a week, you lose your benefits and you're worse off. That's where the tax breaks need to come. That's where the change needs to come. And frankly, we're going to have to get tougher with those who choose unemployment as a long-term option.
Nigel Farage, thank you. Nigel Farage, Reform UK leader there, with a challenge to the government to tackle the benefits bill, and you might tackle the migration bill too. OK, let's get the thoughts now on that from my panel. Sir Ranil Jayawardena, the former Tory MP and Cabinet Minister, and the journalist and former Press Secretary to the late Lib Dem leader Paddy Ashdown, Joe Phillips. Welcome to you both to Farage tonight. To you first, Sir Ranil Jayawardena. It's on you, this, isn't it? I mean, this is a figure from 2022 to 2032, an increase of nearly 5 million. A lot of that time you were not dealing with, as a government, as a Tory party, with net migration.
Well, first of all, it'd be remiss of me to say that we've really got to drill down on some of these facts. And I'm really pleased that in that interview you actually did probe some of what Nigel Farage was saying. Because, whilst we might both want there to be immigration controls, we also want Britain to lead the world in all sorts of areas, like higher education. It's a really good thing if Britain is able to impart her soft power through universities, teaching the brightest and the best from all around the world, and they will form part of these figures, I'm sure. Also, really important to say, to sort of drill down to some of the economic figures, and we've got to make sure that the economy is growing and is going to have the high-wage jobs of the future. What Rachel Reeves is doing right now, what the government are doing right now, is going to depress the economy. So the GDP per capita, regardless what happens with immigration, is likely to fall. And then the last point, which it should, I'm sure viewers will be very mindful of, is when COVID struck, a lot of people left this country to return to their country of origin, and post-COVID, other people have come back. So there are lots of different factors.
We are looking forward here, aren't we, Sir Ranil? We're looking forward in 2032, and the average number arriving is 340,000 a year. I mean, that's not is that acceptable to you?
No.
You seem to be justifying it.
No, but I want to be clear that there are a range of different factors that affect this. It is not as simple as saying that people are coming here and looking for work. There are a range of factors, including higher education, including people filling jobs that they used to have that weren't present during COVID that have come back. And as we grow an economy, we should absolutely, as you rightly probed in that interview, we should encourage more people to get back to work. And so, very encouraging noises from Labour on cutting the benefits bill. Let's see if they do it.
Yes, Joe Phillips, is hard, isn't it? I mean, the Lib Dems had a go when they're in the coalition. It's hard making people get them off benefits into work. The easiest solution is net migration.
Well, yes, although one of the interesting figures in this report from the ONS is the number of people who are going to be elderly.
Yes.
And when you look at the cost, and when you look at the fact that, pensions takes up most of the benefits bill, there are going to be big questions about, whether we can afford the triple lock. I suspect the answer is no.
That's a doubling in over 85
exactly.
to 3.3 million by 2047.
Yeah, exactly. And who is going to look after them if we haven't by then had yet another report to tell us what we already need to do.
Yeah. So are the Lib Dems content about net migration levels?
I think the problem is, and I think Ranil's absolutely right, you need to drill down into it. When you say the bald figures, it makes it sound like they're all coming over on the boats. And I think, when you look at the fact that just this evening, Cardiff University has announced 400 full-time job cuts. Yeah. Universities across the country are suffering because of the lack of international students. And, of course, immigration went up through the roof post-Brexit, and a lot of the people who were backwards and forwards from Europe You know, they're
the issue of family visas in that interview there, I did say to Nigel Farage, well, actually, the government is dealing with that. The government, for its part, says that these figures are staggeringly high. They won't put a cap on it. Your party say it would put a cap on it, although you've tried and failed for 14 years on the issue of the cap. Should they impose a cap? Should the government be brave and do that? Because Whitehall responds to instruction.
Yeah. Absolutely. As you say, the Conservative Party has said that we would have a cap.
But you failed 4 or 5 times.
Well, in fairness, we did make progress before COVID to reduce migration. Clearly, it has gone up since COVID. But I think there's one really interesting point from Jo, actually, on older people. She's absolutely right to say that there is the need to care for our older people. But the biggest thing, the elephant in the room that no one really wants to talk about in government is the fact we don't have enough children in this country. We've got to get our birth rate up. We've got to incentivise and support families to have more children, because it's only by having a growing population domestically can we grow our economy, look after our older people and reduce levels of migration in the long run.
Or train people, homegrown people,
well, that's
to
the challenge,
do the
surely.
jobs.
Off benefits into work.
You know, and to be honest, Ranald, 14 years.
But you've got to have the next generation to train, and at the moment we don't. We've got a declining population.
In 14 years there was no increase in training in social care and nursing and all of those.
But we've got a declining population to train. That's my point.
Well, I know.
You know, we are not meeting our replacement
rate. Don't need
rate.
to be replaced by people coming from abroad.
Well, thanks to my panel and to Nigel Farage, of course, to my panel tonight, around Joe Warden and Joe Phillips. Coming up, I'll be speaking to the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, following the leaked Home Office document, which suggests, among other things, that two-tier policing, that term again, is an extremist narrative. Stay tuned.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Newly released MI5 files reveal that Queen Elizabeth II was kept in the dark over the treachery of a senior courtier.
Yeah, for almost a decade. This is Sir Anthony Blunt, who played a double life, passing intelligence, the KGB, during World War II as a senior MI5 officer. But, remarkably, he was allowed to keep his position amid fears of a major scandal if the truth came out.
Well, now those files have been released by the National Archives, which includes the Queen's response to finding out a trusted member like Anthony Blunt was really a traitor.
Well, joining us now in the studio is GB News Royal correspondent Cameron Walker. Good to see you this morning, Cameron. This is astonishing.
Oh, absolutely. And this wasn't a little spy. This was Anthony Blunt was a full-blown spy. He passed to the Soviets the D-Day deception plans during the Second World War. He was working for MI5, but a double agent for the KGB as well.
The wrong plans.
He passed on the plans.
The wrong ones.
The wrong one in 1944. Yeah. Exactly. But he then got a job inside Buckingham Palace as one of the Queen's most trusted aides and courtiers, the surveyor of her art, essentially like kind of an art advisor for her late Majesty. There was always suspicions about Anthony Blunt way back in the early 50s because he was part of this notorious Cambridge spy ring, a group of 5 boys recruited at Cambridge. 2 of these people fled to Moscow in 1951. Anthony stayed behind in London and subsequently got a job inside Buckingham Palace. And it wasn't until 1964 that he confessed to his treachery. The reason he confessed was because he was granted immunity.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to Farage on GB News. Now, a leaked Home Office review into extremism commissioned after the Southport attacks has raised eyebrows with its controversial recommendations. The report labels concerns over two-tier policing as extremist and downplays rape gangs as an alleged, in quotes, issue often exploited by the far right. Its broad redefinition of extremism, from misogyny to conspiracy theories and the manosphere, risks sidelising Islamism, which made up 80% of police counter-terrorism efforts last year. Key proposals include reinstating non-crime hate incidents and introducing a law against harmful communications. Ministers have today distanced themselves from this report, insisting they won't adopt this expanded definition. But, and here's the twist, many of these ideas mirror Sir Keir Starmer's rhetoric on grooming gangs and his approach to policing. So how does the government square this circle? Joining me now to discuss this is Frank Farage, sociologist and author. Frank Farage, thank you for joining us tonight on Farage. In today's newspapers, you wrote that the Home Office is downplaying the threat of Islamism. Why?
I think there is an attempt to control the narrative and deflate the threat of Islamism and inflate the threat of so-called right-wing terrorism. And I think the reason why they're doing this is because they're really worried about people seeing Islamism, political Islam, as a political problem, principally because there's a lot of tensions and conflict within our society, which the police at the moment are finding it very difficult, if not impossible, to handle. The Labour Party itself has got very strong links with communities that are closely drawn towards Islamist politics. And as a result of that, I think what you have is a dishonest attempt to shift the blame from what is the real threat of terrorism, which is Islamism, to the most idiotic ideas like misogyny somehow, or somehow male toxic masculinity, or the fact that some people don't like other people is a problem of terrorism. So what they've done is they essentially extended the meaning of terrorism, and in the process got rid of its real meaning, which is a threat to home security.
And in your concern here, you say here that 94% of all terrorist killings in Britain since 1999 were linked to Islamists. So why is the Home Office so reluctant to take that head on?
I think for some time they've been very, very scared to call things by the right name. They've made a lot of effort to deny incidents. So whenever there's an incident, a terrorist or a violent incident, in which there are Muslim people involved, they usually never mention the ethnicity of the perpetrators. They never mention their ideology. And instead, they give you this very neutral story, which basically says that nobody knows what's going on. I think there's a cowardice on the part of the security services because they find it very difficult to engage and handle and ultimately defeat this particular problem. It's much easier to pick up young children, 14, 15-year-old children, who are online and looking at British nationalist literature and say that they're the problem. Much easier to deal with that than hardcore jihadist activists.
Now, the government has, of course, distanced itself from this report today. Does that give you any comfort?
Not really, because if you look at the government's record, every time something happens, for example, every time there's a discussion of grooming gangs, somebody from the government comes along and says, don't use that term, that's racist. Every time, for example, there's a discussion that's going on about two-tier policing, that's a language used by right-wing extremists. And if you look at the frequency with which they label anything they don't like as right-wing extremism, without any consideration as to if it really is, you find that what we really have here is an attempt to control the language and control the way we think rather than to deal with the problem.
Well, Frank Farage, Professor of Sociology at the University of Kent, an emeritus role there. Thank you for joining us tonight on Farage. Great to see you. Thank you, sir. Now, joining me now is a Tory MP and former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Suella Braverman, you're there. Welcome to Farage tonight on GB News. You heard what he had to say there. Have you read this report?
I haven't read all of it, but I have seen the reports about it, and I'm very concerned about what the Home Office is saying. They're smearing millions of people for raising legitimate concerns about two-tier policing, rape gangs, or Islamist extremism. People need to be free to voice these concerns. We need to be free to have these conversations in our country.
Mm. You, of course, were Home Secretary when these officials were presumably working there. Why didn't you just get rid of them? I mean, you were in charge of this department for a period. If this is being produced by the Home Office and you don't agree with it, were you limited in action you can take?
Well, if you look at the record and you look at Hansard, you'll see that I did take action to reform the PREVENT programme. I inherited the report from Sir William Shawcross, which diagnosed a lot of the problems and the failings of PREVENT that were ongoing for some time. I then set about a programme of reform. I updated the House of Commons on how that work was going. And one of the things I made a deliberate attempt to tackle was the misinformation from the Home Office and the body called RICU. That was branding politicians like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Douglas Murray, preeminent journalist, as far right. I totally refuted that, and I made clear that that was a wrong assessment, a distorted assessment, and totally reflected the wrong priorities of what the organisation should be focusing on. And so we did start some of the changes to fix reform. I didn't have enough time to complete that work, and unfortunately, it is a huge job that needs doing.
Now, you speak to us from Washington, D.C., Suella Braverman. You're making a speech shortly to the Heritage Foundation think tank. We're speaking on a day when net migration is set to go up by 4.9 million between 2022 and 2032. In your speech, you talk about immigrants refusing to learn English. They don't want to embrace the Judeo-Christian culture that defines the UK. You'd say that, rather shockingly, I would say, that the truth is that Britain has imported a fifth column into its society, one that refuses to integrate or abide by our laws. Now, a fifth column is a group within a country at war with the rest of it. I mean, that's quite a thing to say, Suella Braverman.
Well, I think we have to be honest about what's happening to our country, and we need to be asking ourselves, where is our country heading? And we just have to look at these immigration figures today. We need to look at the endemic and profound problems of integration, Islamist extremism, the fact that in some of our towns around the country, Sharia law is being applied, where too many people have come to this country, they don't speak English, they expect translation everywhere they go. They are imposing their outdated and foreign value system upon British people and British culture. And I think we need to look at that. Just today, in the Times, Trevor Phillips has recorded that I think 75% of those people on trial for murder at the Old Bailey are originating from war-torn African countries. That is a staggering statistic of which we need to take stock. And the reality is there are too many people coming into our country who don't embrace British culture, who don't vow to support Britain, and actually want to harm our people and destroy our country.
So why are they being allowed in if they are, as you say? I mean, that of course can't go for all migrants coming here, a tiny minority, you would hope. But why is it the case that your government, your Tory government for 14 years, didn't do enough about this?
You're absolutely right to ask that question, Christopher. And unfortunately, we failed the British people when it came to tackling net migration, whether it's illegal migration. We let our borders be open, so posing a national security risk. Unfortunately, we now know that some of those people who came in illegally to the country went on to commit heinous crimes against innocent British citizens. But when it comes to legal migration, there are many people, again, not every single immigrant to this country, but there are too many people coming into this country who are committing crimes, who are undermining our values, and who are harming our country. If we're not prepared to talk about these uncomfortable truths, we have no chance of reversing this very damaging trend in our country.
And what do you want to see from your leader, Kemi Badenoch? Is she making the right noises on this? She talks about a cap, doesn't she, on net migration, but is she need to go further?
Well, Kemi has been right in accepting responsibility. Only recently she said, I'm sorry, on behalf of the Conservative Party. I think that was the right thing to do because we have to accept responsibility for the failings on immigration. We now need to demonstrate to the British people that we're worthy of their trust. That's why I've been arguing, I did argue for many months in the Cabinet that we needed to bring down immigration. We needed a cap on immigration. We need to impose visa restrictions. We need to have a numerical limit, which the British people can
who was
trust
opposing
and to
that?
which we can be held account.
And that was the Treasury opposing those measures?
It was pretty much the whole Cabinet, I'm afraid. It was, it was the Prime Minister, the Treasury, the Education Department, the Health Department, the DEFRA Department, the Business Department. I'm afraid I was a lone voice battling against a consensus which supported higher migration.
Well, Suella Braverman, thank you for joining us tonight on Farage from Washington, D.C. Thank you. I got a statement here from the Home Office. A spokesman for the Home Office says that the counter-extremism sprint sought to comprehensively assess the challenge facing our country and lay the foundations for a new approach to tackling extremism so we can stop people from being drawn towards hateful ideologies. This includes tackling Islamism and extreme right-wing ideologies, which are most prominent today. Just finally, the findings from the sprint have not been formally agreed by ministers, and we are considering a wide range of potential next steps arising from that work. And the copy of that is on the screen now. Coming up after the break then, pressure's mounting on the Prime Minister to take heed of President Donald Trump's calls for the UK to increase our defence spending. Pressure from his own Labour MPs. Stay tuned.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Heading into tomorrow, it's going to be turning wet and windy once again across southern coasts. Brighter elsewhere, though we can't rule out a few showers for some. The reason it's been so unsettled is because we've had low pressure largely dominating the weather, but out to the west we do have a slight ridge of high pressure building, bringing in some finer conditions later on Tuesday through into Wednesday. For tonight, though, still plenty of showers feeding through, particularly across Wales and central areas of the UK, eventually dying out through the early hours of the morning, leaving plenty of clear spells. Still plenty of showers, longer spells of rain across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, though. But with clearer skies, that means temperatures should soon dip away, so likely feeling chillier compared to recent nights. Then to start off tomorrow, there should be plenty of dry and bright weather around, still those showers in the north. Just need to keep an eye on this area of rain just starting to clip in to the far southwest during the morning. A mix of dry spells and showers across much of England and Wales, some longer spells of rain around western coasts of Northern Ireland. Similar across the northeast of Scotland, some outbreaks of rain here, likely falling as snow across hills, and a good breeze moving along those northeastern coasts too. But for much of the day, many of us will see plenty of dry weather, still those showers though feeding in around coasts of Northern Ireland and northeast Scotland. And then it's later on into the afternoon we'll see outbreaks of rain start to clip southern coast. It's going to be a very wet and windy day on offer across the Channel Islands. So the worst of the weather here, but elsewhere seeing a slightly drier day on offer, and with temperatures round about average for the time of year, though slightly milder across the south. As we head into Thursday, a ridge of high pressure means much more sunshine around, plenty of dry weather once this area of rain moves away from the far southeast. Still can't rule out a few showers, particularly once again around coasts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but for many, plenty of dry weather and lots of sunshine around too. Still some dry weather for Friday, though can't rule out some rain, particularly as we head towards the weekend, and temperatures remaining around average.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
And we're back now. So Keir Starmer is resisting pressure from US President Donald Trump and the British military to increase defence spending. It comes as Labour's own MPs have warned Sir Keir that a failure to boost military spending could put the special relationship with the US at risk. The Prime Minister is reportedly planning to delay bringing defence spending up to 2.5% of gross domestic product until after 2030. That's after the Tories planned to do so at the last election, and far below President Donald Trump's demand of 5% of GDP, or it should be said the US is nowhere near 5% as things stand. However, Labour Defence Committee Chairman Tan Desai issued a warning saying this: to maintain a good relationship with the US, we will have to spend more on defence. Can the UK risk not committing to raising defence spending? Let's go to the thoughts on that with my panel. Sir Ranald Jayawardena, a former Tory MP and a former Conservative Cabinet Minister, and the journalist and former Press Secretary to the late Paddy Ashdown, the Lib Dem leader, Joe Phillips. Joe, defence is hard, isn't it? But we need to spend more. The world's getting more and more uncertain.
Absolutely. And if we want the end to war in Ukraine, the question will be, from America, OK, are you going to put forces on the ground, peacekeepers, if you like?
That's UK troops.
UK troops, because America won't. And we can see that...
They might.
Well, they
don't
won't.
know that.
But it's very unlikely. It's very unlikely that the American public and the American president would want to be drawn into something, you know, 1,000 miles away. They're talking about their own Iron Dome over America. And defence is difficult because nobody can see the benefit of it. We know that the public finances are under huge pressure. It's a bit like house insurance. You know, we all hate it, but we know we've got to have it. And I do think, you know, as the threats to Britain and Europe, the continent, from what's happened in Ukraine and elsewhere, we need to. And we need to bite the bullet and spend it. But, you know, I was just saying to Ranald, pensions and defence spending doesn't leave much room for anything else in public services.
Yeah, Ranald Jayawardena, of course, you were an Environment Secretary, other roles too, a Trade Minister, I think, from memory. There's always difficult things to weigh up, aren't there? The worry about a war in Ukraine is how to keep funding it.
Well, you know, fundamentally, you can't have a lovely environment in the UK. You can't continue to do trade with our partners unless we have our security. And for the last 30-plus years, we've become very relaxed about that. We can't be relaxed anymore. I think there's a really important point, though, which is that there was a track, a clear direction of travel to increase defence spending in this country.
By when again? 2028?
By 2028, under the Conservatives. That's now been abandoned. And I think that's what's sending very, very negative signals. And, you know, other parties in the House of Commons have all sorts of different views. You know, the Liberal Democrats in the past have wanted to abolish our nuclear deterrent, for example. So there's got to... I'm really pleased to hear Jo say what she said today, but there's got to be, I think, unity across Parliament, across all parties, that now it's just too serious to play the political games that some parties have played in the past. We've got to get really to grips with the threats faced that the country faces from state and non-state actors.
I think we do. I mean, Labour is doing the hard work on defence.
Yeah.
John Healey is a trusted, respected figure, cross-party. George Robertson's doing the review for the government.
Yeah, and I think George, you know, once he comes up with his report, which is due in the next few months, that will be the point at which the government can then make a proper, well-informed decision, assuming it's not like the Home Office report, which it won't be, I'm sure. Yes. But I think, you know, Keir Starmer had talked about 2.5%. Now he looks as though he's rowing back and saying 2.3. You know, we've got to be realistic. We can't expect America, and nor should we actually expect America always to come to our aid. We need to be looking, you know,
close to home. But they won't, will they? I mean, America First option is one that is going to say, look after yourselves first. We haven't yet even seen Trump go to the NATO summit expected later this year and, you know, go for it and boss them about.
Nobody wants to pay it. But, you know, you can look, if you're in southern Greece, for instance, you know, you're going to feel miles and miles and miles away from what's happening in Ukraine. If you're in Norway, It's a little bit closer to home.
Yeah. But Rana, what's your take on this? I mean, they should push up defence spending, but of course the cost is other schools, hospitals, other priorities.
Well, unquestionably, defence spending's got to rise, and we do have to have some tough discussions and decisions. You know, it's no point having a benefits bill as large as it is if you can't defend the people that you're trying to support here at home. And, you know, it's not just this decision on spending that's important, but things like giving away the Chagos Islands, you know, that was a very poor early decision. I hope that as a result of what's happened in the United States, that decision will be reversed. We've got to have coherent policy across the board. It's good, though, to hear that Peter Mandelson has been accepted as ambassador, which shows that the relationship...
Has he been accepted yet?
He has. The relationship
I think that's hot off the press.
The relationship is still strong between the UK and the US. We've got to make sure it's kept that way, and, you know, Peter Mandelson will have a huge role to play in making that happen.
Yeah, and just finally, there's a Tatan Desai there, the Labour MP. Increasingly, Labour MPs will be calling for clarity on the timeline.
Yeah, of course they will. And, you know, it is very difficult because for many people it is fundamentally, philosophically, something that they don't want to spend money on. But, you know, we've all seen what's happened in the last 3 years.
OK, well, Joe, Randall, thank you for joining us again tonight. Now, for tonight's What the Farage, I want to draw attention to a fading slice of London life, pie and mash. Once the original fast food, this iconic meal, that's meat pie and mashed potato and parsley liquor, was a staple of the East End's working class. Brave souls might even pair it with jellied eels, a relic of when the Thames teemed with them. But pie and mash shops are vanishing from nearly 300 in the 19th century to fewer than 40 today. Why? Well, sky-high rents and deindustrialisation are pushing Cockneys to Kent and Essex, and modern tastes don't help. Jellied eels, after all, are a tough sell to millennials in the age of avocado toast. Here's our millennial reporter, chief pie eater, Adam Cherry, trying his first ever jellied eel earlier today.
We've got some jelly and we've got a bit of eel. So here we go, live taste test of some jellied eels for you on GB News, the People's Channel. Here
I'll
we go.
do a voiceover. Now, they're quite bony. The bone runs central down the middle. Be careful. Don't be an amateur. You're meant to pick the bone off the central spine. And they're quite fishy, aren't they? Yeah, this is now turning into...
There is a bone in there. There is a bone in there.
This is now turning into a Bush Tucker trial, Adam Cherry.
Well, joining me now is the man himself on that Bush Tucker trial. That was the voice of Martin Dorban, of course, Adam Cherry. Welcome to Farage. Adam, it was your first taste ever of jellied eels. Yeah. But your face betrayed your feelings. Are you part of the problem? You're a softie. You're a millennial softie.
Wait a minute. OK. It was not, you know... It was a surprising texture and taste. It wasn't the most...
What did it taste like, then?
Did Martin have any, Adam?
No, Martin didn't have any.
Yes,
do you know what, Martin, if you're listening, he made me have a second try. Which I was, by the way, I was delighted by, absolutely.
What's it taste like, though, seriously? OK, what does it taste like? East End heritage.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not very good at describing flavour and profile. The texture... Fish? Yeah, it will not surprise you. It tastes very fishy. It's very slimy. I had it in my teeth the entire time I was doing that appearance. But the reason we were there, as you said, was that these meat and pie shops are dying out, tastes are changing, in some cases maybe for good reason, but you know, quite seriously, there's a history and a culture and a community around these pie shops. That one in particular, where was it? Manzi's, it's in on Tower Bridge Road. So it's in Tower Bridge. It's been there for over 100 years.
Manzi's is one of the oldest in London.
So when you go in, there's a plaque on the wall saying proudly serving customers since 1892. The recipe is over 100. They clearly have not fiddled with the recipe very much.
But I think people should try local foods.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
History is bound up in them.
Yeah, and I did a piece a couple of months ago when the Conservative MP Richard Holden was campaigning to get protected status for the recipe, you know, to try and stop imitation other vendors coming along and protect the authenticity. It's a good thing, it's interesting. But also, like you said, all the businesses, they're moving out, they're moving to Essex, they're moving to Kent. The younger generations aren't as interested either as customers, because there's so much competition, a lot more than there was in Victorian times. There's no Uber Eats there, obviously. So they're fighting on that front, but also the businesses themselves, they're handing it over to the next generation. They're just not as interested in doing it.
Shame, isn't it?
It is a shame.
But architecturally, some of them are absolutely beautiful. And Mans is in Deptford. You know, beautiful tiles, really old-fashioned.
Have you ever tried jelly deals?
Yes, I have.
How it looks.
You have?
How do you enjoy them?
I wouldn't have it again, but I have had smoke deal, which is very nice, actually.
Roundjar Warden, have you ever had a jelly deal?
I must confess I haven't, but I'm sure it could be made better by a bit of Tabasco, perhaps, or something like that.
Well, they do delivery, Ranald, so if you want to get some jelly deals, we can make it happen very easily.
I've got a Lancashire haggis waiting for me at home.
Oh, I had haggis on Saturday.
About a Lancashire haggis.
What's that?
I don't know. We've got to eat it. It's in the fridge. Thanks to Adam for coming on What the Farage tonight, to my panel, of course. And coming up next, the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, should he be privy to state secrets? I only ask this because the Tories were given privileged briefings about the Southport attacks, and Nigel Farage wasn't. Is that right? Don't go anywhere.
Can't wait to get in that sea.
Lovely and warm.
Just like the feeling of having great travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Another weather system pushing into parts of Western Europe will bring some further heavy rain and strong winds as we go through tomorrow across parts of Western France, much of Spain and Portugal. It is looking wet and there will be some hill snow around too. Also some wet weather affecting southern Italy, feeding into Greece as well. That being said, as we go through later this week, most places will see something a bit drier and also some decent warmth at times too. So not a total washout of a week. Bye-bye.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
As we kick off 2025, many of us might be thinking about a bit of a wardrobe refresh, especially if you're over 50 and you feel like the high street doesn't quite cater to you.
Indeed. That's where our next guest, Mel Tillett, comes in. She's in the studio with us now.
Mel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I love that you are this accidental influencer. I love that you said that's the first time.
Yeah, it is. That's the first time I've heard it.
You can have that
yes,
for free on
thank
TV.
you so much. It's quite true.
Tell us about your following. Obviously, an influencer that many people might typically think of would be someone in their teens, someone in their 20s, someone who's particularly social media savvy, using TikTok. Talk to us about your brand of influencer.
Well, our influencer, my kind of influence is over the older age group, the over 50s. For my business, I do a lot of live videos. I do them early in the morning at 7:30, which sounds ridiculous, but I know my ladies are up and about at that time having a cup of coffee or whatever that might be. And just being honest about day-to-day life. So my dogs are running about, my grandchildren are even sometimes in them, one thing and another. So it's just been purely by accident that I've got this really nice, loyal following, and I get lovely messages off ladies. I'll do things like, I'll tell them when I'm going for a mammogram, and I'll say, come on, everybody go for your mammogram.
That's brilliant.
All sort of health-conscious things. I've been a lot heavier than I am now, and I've slimmed down and lost some weight. I've been talking about that journey as well. And then ladies will ask me questions on the videos, and we chat about all sorts of different things. And now I'm getting messages every day, and people are loving the clothing ranges that we do. And it's just, I started off as a business, that's purely what I did, but it's turned out into this other, I get recognised places I go now, which is really weird.
It must be a huge benefit to your business as well.
We employ around about 50 people.
Wow.
And I'm quite open to my audience and saying, you know, while you keep buying offers, while you're loving our products and our clothing, you're keeping 50 people in jobs.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Here's something I've been pondering. Why isn't Nigel Farage, the Right Honourable Nigel Farage, on the Privy Council? Now, back in August last year, James Cleverly, then the Shadow Home Secretary, was briefed on the Southport killer. As a Privy Councillor, he was entitled to sensitive security updates. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage, arguably one of the most influential figures currently in British politics, wasn't allowed in the room. The Privy Council exists to honour those who serve the nation. It includes senior politicians, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example, my colleague at GB News, Sir Ranald Jayawardena, he is one, as well as clergy, judges and others whose names most of us wouldn't recognise. It also grants access to classified information for those handling high-level responsibilities, including crucial security briefings. Now, love him or loathe him, and many do both, Farage's impact has been undeniable. So why isn't he recognised like others who have shaped Britain's national conversation? Joining me now is my panel, the Right Honourable Sir Ranald Jayawardena, the former Tory MP and Cabinet Minister, and, of course, the journalist and former plain Joe Phillips, the former press secretary to the late Lib Dem leader Paddy Ashdown. Ranald Jayawardena, why isn't Nigel Farage as trusted as you are by the King?
Well, I mean, first, it's really important to say it's not, strictly speaking, an honour. It's simply a vehicle, an organisation that allows the sharing of secret information, and it's important that a line has to be drawn somewhere. Otherwise,
what's wrong with Farage? He's got 5 MPs, 4 million votes.
Otherwise, everyone in Parliament could claim that there needs to be access to certain information. For example, the Trade Committee could say, well, we need to know the inner workings of trade negotiations, so we should all be Privy Councillors.
He's the leader of a party in the House of Commons.
So what? And so is the leader of the Green Party, for the sake of argument. Now, I think they've got
4 MPs, he's got 5.
They've got 2 leaders, and they've got peers. I mean, so where do you draw the line?
The DUP has 1. Gavin Robinson, he is 5 MPs. He's Right Honourable Gavin Robinson.
Yes, OK, fine. And Stephen Flynn, the leader of the SNP.
MPs.
Right, but Stephen Flynn was the leader of the third party. And, of course, the opposition, Kemi, Badenoch, James Cleverly, who you mentioned already, Chris Philp, they act on behalf of the whole opposition.
Okay. But they would have had theirs
Joe
anyway.
Phillips.
They would have had theirs.
Plain commoner like me, Joe Phillips.
Plain commoner.
What's your view on this?
Well, I mean, it is ridiculous. Why should Nigel be on the Privy Council?
So he's not shouting, he knows what's going on, he's not saying things
and I've said
cover-up.
this to him on this very programme, maybe if he had chosen to write to the Home Secretary and then go on Twitter and say, I have written to the Home Secretary, instead of going out, going nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
It's been like this for years, that he's not trusted by the establishment, and that's why he's not allowed in.
That's probably how he prefers it. I mean, he's not here to answer for himself. But I think, you know, if you can't have it both ways. You can't be a maverick and poke the bear and then be expected to be inside that bear's cage.
I asked him earlier this week, off camera, would you want to be in the Privy Council? Of course you would, he says. He's never been invited.
No, but it's not about invitations. It's not about a party, is it? And I think there are plenty of ways for government to share sensitive information.
Joining me now,
parties.
itching to get involved, is Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Right Honourable Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. Just quickly, your colleague, Nigel Farage, he should be in.
You completely misunderstand the Privy Council. You don't get its purpose. It has 2 roles. One is, as the advisors of the government, that it is His Majesty's Privy Council. The Cabinet is a subcommittee of the Privy Council. Then it is a judicial advisor to the King. That's why the judges are made Privy Councillors. They rule on cases primarily from overseas, but some other matters are omitted. So
yes,
it is not an honour. It is not some club that you join.
It is a club.
It is not a club, and it is given to ministers of the Crown, mainly people who have been ministers or will be ministers. It is not something handed out with the rations.
Very briefly.
It's also given to the third party, which is why the leader of the SNP got it. It is not given to 4th, 5th and 6th parties.
What's on your show tonight?
What am I going to be talking about? I'm going to be talking about not the Privy Council, going back to the Witan, I could. This extraordinary paper from the Home Office.
Good.
And
Nearly
how
out.
that came out. OK.
Thank the panel and the team. Coming up next on Save the Nation. Thank you for great fun tonight.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day.
Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Heading into tomorrow, it's going to be turning wet and windy once again across southern coasts. Brighter elsewhere, though we can't rule out a few showers for some. The reason it's been so unsettled is because we've had low pressure largely dominating the weather, but out to the west we do have a slight ridge of high pressure building, bringing in some finer conditions later on Tuesday through into Wednesday. For tonight, though, still plenty of showers feeding through, particularly across Wales and central areas of the UK, eventually dying out through the early hours of the morning, leaving plenty of clear spells. Still plenty of showers, longer spells of rain across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland, though. But with clearer skies, that means temperatures should soon dip away, so likely feeling chillier compared to recent nights. Then to start off tomorrow, there should be plenty of dry and bright weather around, still those showers in the north. Just need to keep an eye on this area of rain just starting to clip in to the far southwest during the morning. A mix of dry spells and showers across much of England and Wales, some longer spells of rain around western coasts of Northern Ireland. Similar across the northeast of Scotland, some outbreaks of rain here, likely falling a